Well, thank you so much for having me to your congregation today. I think that Tim invited me to be here on Earth Day because just this past summer, the large National Unitarian Universalist Gathering General Assembly passed as a statement of conscience, a resolution about food justice and all the ways that our personal choices play into larger issues out in the rest of the world. And it was an exciting event for those who were at GA. And he wanted me to come speak on the topic on Earth Day and bring to your attention things like the resources that you can find. You have an insert in your order of service called Sample Actions, and there are websites listed there, and there's just a host of materials on the web for anyone who's interested in learning more about this topic. And our reading comes from one of those materials, a sort of 70-page resource guide for Unitarian Universalists who are interested in thinking about the issues of food justice, things like climate change and trade and labor and hunger and malnutrition, all the ways that the world is affected by our food choices. And it also has information about consumer trends like eating plant-based diets and fair trade, and I'm trying to just rack my memory here. Well, one of them is slow food, and the one that this reading focuses on is eating local. And this passage is entitled, "The Ethics of Eating Local Are Complex," and you can find more at the websites listed there. Many environmentally minded people seek to reduce their personal impact on the earth through eating sustainably. But the issues involved are complex and sometimes counterintuitive. Take eating locally. Locavores center their diets on food grown within a 100-mile radius of where it is sold and consumed. On the one hand, eating local keeps consumer dollars in the local economy, which strengthens not only the local economy, but also relationships among neighbors. It channels more money directly to farmers as less money is spent on processing, transport, marketing, and intermediaries along vegetables, typically 1,500-mile supply chains. Shorter food routes put less carbon into the air, thereby reducing global warming. And yet, eating locally may not be as beneficial as it may seem. In eating locally, one can subsidize factory farms, pesticide-intensive crops, and farms with exploitative labor practices, all of which can be local and are local to somewhere. If you compare the environmental impact of organic tomatoes raised in a local greenhouse to tomatoes shipped from a distant area with a warm climate, you'll find that the local tomatoes can use up to 20% more resources because of the energy inputs that greenhouses require. And it gets even more surprising. Driving an average car just 3 miles to and from a farmer's market releases as much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere as shipping 17 pounds of produce halfway around the world. So what does this mean for those who take the ethics of their food choices seriously? Here ends the reading. There are so many mysteries that surround food. Food is substance of this planet that we take into ourselves, fueling not only our movement, but consciousness itself. Of all the ways that we relate to nature, eating is among the most intimate. So many mysteries surrounding food, so many paths we could embark on. Here now is the food mystery that I chose to begin our considered reflection. A man walks into a doctor's office. He has a cucumber up his nose, a carrot in his left ear, and a banana in his right ear. "What's the matter with me?" he asks the doctor. The doctor replies, "You're not eating properly." Well, that was a food mystery easily solved, but others are more difficult to comprehend. For example, if you were to eat equal amounts of pasta and antipasti, would you be just as hungry when you finished as when you began? Was Woody Allen right when he said that the food in New York restaurants had two big problems? First, it tastes terrible, and second, such small portions. And finally, why is it that a typical American breakfast asks for only a day's effort from the chicken, but a lifetime commitment from the pig? Well, I heard some oohs along there. That joke was uncomfortable for many of us, and rightly so. You and I have become aware in the last few decades that our choices around food are much more complex than anything that we were taught as children. For me, that realization that I had a lot to learn about food dawned when I arrived at Macalester College in St. Paul. Three things happened. First, I encountered all sorts of bizarre food in the school cafeteria that I'd never before seen. Not normal food like I'd grown up with in my Midwestern Methodist home. No normal food like tater tot hamburger casserole or macaroni beef sauté, and no desserts like Jell-O with little wrinkly bits of fruit quivering inside. No, instead, the college cafeteria catered to an international student body with strange foods with names like hummus and falafels, lentils and samosas, tortellini and tetrazzini, and hobakjion and bibimbap. I was initially put off by all this culinary variety. But as I ventured into unfamiliar territory, plate by plate, I fell in love with food all over again. My only unhappy eating experiences were on days when, in honor of that or this British holiday, the cafeteria served British food. And since I am of British descent, I can say that I came to understand Martha Harrison's speculation that what motivated the British to colonize so much of the world was that they were just looking for a decent meal. So the second thing that taught me I had a lot to learn about food was majoring in world religions and encountering the incredible attention given to food in all major faith traditions. Some, like Hinduism, focused on taking good care of your body, treating it as a temple, and resisting temptation to pollute that temple for the sake of passing pleasure. Some, like Islam, placed emphasis on holding political structures accountable for equitable food distribution and commanding the well-to-do to provide alms and food to the hungry. Some religious edicts sought to ensure the welfare of animals used for agriculture, such as Buddhist teachings that said simply, animals raised for food deserve compassion as much as any other creature that walks on the ground or flies through the air. Or the Jewish Sabbath code that states that the Sabbath code can and must be superseded in order to alleviate the pain of living beings. Other wisdom focused on reverence and care for the earth, like indigenous traditions, instructing us that we need not take any more from the earth than we need, or waste any portion of what we take. Others, as we have heard, taught that without deliberate acts of food justice, our religious rituals are empty. These hundreds of religious teachings about food threw into question the adequacy of the food ethics that I had been raised with. And the third thing introducing me to the complexity of food was through the volunteerism of some individual who will never know the effect that his simple act had on me. It was at an Earth Day concert, actually. I saw a man at a booth with a placard behind him listing 88 facts about animal agriculture. Each fact was stunning. It stated, and I later confirmed, that animal agriculture contributes more to global climate change than the entire transport sector. So I don't know if you can really take that in. I realize I'm speaking pretty quickly. But transportation, cars, trucks, railroads, airplanes, the entire shipping industry, often considered the biggest contributor to climate change. But animal agriculture contributes far more. A recent United Nations study confirmed it. So every time we buy meat, eggs, or dairy, we're subsidizing climate change. Staring at that bald fact, I had to face the question, Why would the preferences of my palate, which morally speaking are relatively trivial, outweigh the scores of harmful effects of animal agriculture on the most vital interests of our planet and future generations? Now, I did not want to change. I liked the food that I was accustomed to. I wasn't meaning anyone any harm. I was just looking for a good meal, like my British ancestors. Yet, just as their conquest led to untold damage lasting for generations, in my own pursuit of a good meal, I was perpetuating some of the worst social and environmental ills affecting the planet in my own era: climate change, land degradation, air and water pollution, loss of biodiversity. The sixth great extinction event in Earth's history, this time caused by just one species, ours. This sixth great extinction that we're in the middle of now. So, as you might imagine, those 15 years ago, I became vegetarian. And not only vegetarian, but religiously vegetarian. And not only religiously vegetarian, but righteously, evangelically vegetarian. Maybe you met me? I was sure that everybody should be a vegetarian, and boy, was I righteous. My fall from vegetarian righteousness and trying to impose my own ethic on everyone else happened thanks to a Latina activist, Lauren Ornelas, who runs something called the Food Empowerment Project. She graciously listened to my perspectives about eating lower on the food chain, and then she told me about her urban Latino neighborhood in California's Bay Area, in what's called a food desert, where residents could walk a few blocks in any direction to buy beer or cigarettes or hard liquor or Twinkies, but they would have to get in a car that most of them didn't own and drive for several miles to white neighborhoods if they wanted to buy unfried or unprocessed meat, let alone a fresh vegetable. Ironically, some of those Latinos and Latina immigrants spent their days harvesting fresh, healthy vegetables for distribution throughout the Bay Area, but not to their own neighborhood. Lauren was working to bring a small grocery to the neighborhood and to create a community garden so that residents could enjoy healthy, organic food. As I got to understand Lauren's important work, I realized that people struggling to put food on the table have enough to worry about just in getting healthy food, that they don't need some white guy badgering them about eating low on the food chain. And my righteous eating habits at the time, I realized, were contributing to their health problems and even fatalities. How? At the time, the produce that I bought was almost entirely conventionally raised, grown on farms that routinely expose field workers to toxins and inhumane conditions. In the United States, conventional agriculture has one of the highest fatality rates for on-the-job deaths. So I learned again that issues around food are rarely as clear-cut and obvious as they may seem, that like any other aspect of UU religious life, our relationship with food isn't about having final answers, but about taking the questions seriously and taking our own behavior seriously and being willing to grow and change, always. You know, I grew up not thinking much about the ethics of food, not caring much, just sticking to my habits, not considering the questions. And later, I went from that extreme of not caring to the other, righteousness. And too often, when it comes to matters of ethics, Unitarian Universalists like me find ourselves at one extreme or the other. At one end is righteousness, thinking that our own particular perspective covers what everybody ought to be doing, and in fact what they would be doing if they understood the issue as well as, I did. You can be righteous about eating local or organic or fair trade or low on the food chain or not low on the food chain, and I've even met some people who are righteous about drinking only Dunkin' Donuts coffee. At the other end of the extreme from righteousness is apathy and willful ignorance, where you find the questions and issues involved in an ethical question so daunting that even though you know they matter, You just refuse to let them have any kind of grip on you. A little boy asked his mother what the difference was between ignorance and apathy, and she replied, "I don't know and I don't care." Righteousness on one extreme, willful ignorance and apathy on the other extreme. What is the middle path? I'm beginning to believe that the middle path involves holding close to humility. I think of Universalist minister Clarence Russell Skinner, who said that our current comprehension is not a tombstone marking the resting place of truth, but is rather a milestone on the long, arduous journey to the truth. Humility and openness to learning. What do they look like in practice when it comes to mindful eating? Well, today, I hope that many of us are about to find out. Today, as the world celebrates Earth Day, this congregation joins hundreds of UU congregations across the continent in putting our faith into action by expanding Earth Day from Sunday, April 22nd, into something much bigger. The idea is for each of us who are willing to take a small lifestyle change on a 40-day test drive, knowing that our personal choices affect many aspects of global justice. For sample actions, see the sample actions flyer in your order of service. And if 40% of us try out a new action for the 40 days, this congregation will receive a special recognition from the UUA's 40-40-42 campaign. The first 40 is 40 days, second 40 is for the 40%, and the fourth 42 is because it's the 42nd Earth Day. So what lifestyle changes might we be willing to adopt as a bold experiment for the next 40 days for the sake of the earth and all who live on it? We're already doing some things. For example, as an individual, I've now shifted to a vegan and mostly organic diet, so that wouldn't count as my 40-day action. Instead, I've picked out a new challenge, something I've not tried before, in part because I think I can pull it off, but I'm not sure. In the same way, I invite you to think of something new to challenge yourself with, something important but doable that reflects your UU values. Take a moment to consider the 40-40-42 pledge card, which is just a blank index card in your order of service. And if you don't have one, you can get one in the fellowship hall afterward. And just think about what might you write there? What for you would be a new commitment, a new challenge, a new adventure? Let us join in just a moment of silent reflection. And you can keep thinking about it. We'll have another opportunity to reflect and write just after the offertory. There's no one right answer. Choose something that emerges from your own values and that feels significant to you. As Unitarian minister Francis David said, we need not think alike to love alike. And our new national UU conversation about food and religion sets a welcome table where all perspectives are cherished and all people and all creation are in mind. The idea of a welcome table began in the Jewish tradition of the Seder table, which leaves one seat empty for Elijah or the stranger. In the Christian tradition, the welcome table began with Jesus dining with prostitutes, tax collectors, lepers, and other social outcasts. You know, those people. When you invite those people to the table, those people aren't those people anymore. They are my people, our people, us. During the long decades of slavery in this country, enslaved people, understanding the power of the welcome table, composed a hymn imagining a heavenly reign of justice and freedom, where all would be welcomed as equals. In our UU tradition, what would it mean to set a welcome table? Literally, what food would you lay if you knew that a migrant laborer, or a farming family would be joining you for the meal? Would you choose food harvested by workers paid less than a living wage, whose work exposes them daily to carcinogens? Surely not. What would it mean to set a welcome table where not only you and your family would feel welcome and cared for, but workers too would feel their inherent worth and dignity respected, and the earth, the birds of the air, and the beasts of the field, and all those affected by our choices would feel part of our beloved community? How would it feel actually inside, in your heart, in your soul, if you could someday look at the table spread before you in your own home and say, this food expresses my values and my spirituality, my compassion, my respect, my reverence for the earth, and it reinforces all of those things. This brings me back to my spiritual center 3 times a day. Imagine what it would be like to experience some taste of grace at every meal. We like to think that what we eat is our own business, thank you, having only to do with our personal finances and our health. But in our infinitely interconnected natural world, there is no such thing as an isolated event. Bill Schultz says we must hold the whole world in our hands. Well, every time we pick up a piece of food, we already do. Every time we buy food, we vote for the future that we want for our children. It matters how the food we eat is grown and harvested or slaughtered. It matters that eating a plant-based diet would make more of a difference for climate change than would switching to a hybrid car. It matters if the food we are eating came from an industrial farm that cares more about profits than people. It matters if we pay money into a system that's flooding ecosystems with pesticides, herbicides, fungicides. Nothing is an isolated act. Not only are you what you eat, but we are what you eat, and you are affected by what I eat, and what we eat can make a better society, not only here, but throughout the world. So will our faith someday join with those world religions that take food ethics seriously? Why not make that day today? And if we want our own source of inspiration, we can rely on the words of those famous philosophers known as the Beatles. I am me, and you are you, and we are all together. May it be so. Amen, blessed be, and Goo Goo Gajoob.